Buddhism on Rebirth and Reincarnation. As the first light of dawn breaks over a sleeping world, a stillness fills the air, offering a rare moment of peace and quiet reflection. In these precious early hours, many of us find our minds turning inward, pondering the questions that inevitably arise as we grow older, the mysteries of life and death. Perhaps you too have wondered, what happens when this journey of life reaches its inevitable end? Is there truly an eternal soul that drifts from one existence to another, untouched by time or change? Or is there something more profound at work, something that transcends the physical form, something far deeper, more intricate, and more liberating than we have been led to believe? The teachings of the Buddha offer a perspective that may surprise you, one that speaks not of reincarnation, as commonly understood in many spiritual traditions, but of a subtle yet powerful concept: rebirth. This is not the endless cycle of a permanent, unchanging soul, but a transformative and dynamic flow, a continuation of experience, guided by the forces of our actions and intentions, shaped by the very essence of who we are becoming with each moment. Rebirth, as taught by the Buddha, is an invitation to see beyond the illusion of a fixed self. It's a profound shift in understanding, an invitation to embrace the impermanence of all things, including the notion of I and mine. It is not a mysterious event that awaits us at the end of life, but a continuous process that weaves through every moment of our existence. This concept of rebirth offers far more than a mere explanation of what happens after death. It offers a roadmap for how we can live now, with more mindfulness, more compassion, and a deeper clarity about the nature of suffering and the path to freedom. The beauty of this teaching is not just in the wisdom it imparts about life and death, but in how it transforms our understanding of the present. It teaches us that every action we take, every word we speak, and every thought we entertain leaves an imprint on the fabric of our experience. By understanding this interconnectedness, we come to realize that the key to a meaningful life is not in searching for what lies beyond, but in awakening to the profound truth that exists right here, right now. So, as we begin to explore the Buddhist view of rebirth and its implications, we will not only uncover the mysteries of life and death, but also discover the powerful tools that can guide us toward a life of greater peace, wisdom, and compassion. The path is not just one of understanding, but of living in a way that brings us closer to the freedom we all seek. And in doing so, we take one step closer to the most profound truth of all, that through understanding rebirth, we come to understand how to live more fully, how to live with a heart full of compassion, and how to let go of the illusions that bind us to suffering. The journey ahead may seem mysterious, but it is a journey worth taking, a journey that promises to illuminate not just the nature of rebirth, but the very nature of our lives. The illusion of the soul. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy lies a profound insight that cuts through the very core of how we perceive ourselves and our existence: the illusion of the soul. The Buddha's teachings, which are as timeless as the mountains and as vast as the sky, gently invite us to release the belief in a permanent, unchanging soul that transcends lifetimes. This concept, anatta, or no self, challenges the very foundation of how we've come to understand who we are. In most spiritual traditions, the soul is seen as the unchanging essence of an individual, the core that moves from one life to the next. It is often regarded as eternal, a spark of divinity that will continue on unbroken through countless lifetimes. But in Buddhism, the Buddha presents a different, radically transformative view. There is no permanent self, no enduring soul that carries from one life to the next. Instead, what we call self is a fleeting, ever-changing process, a flow of consciousness that cannot be reduced to any fixed thing. Imagine, if you will, the flow of a river. The river moves constantly, but the water that exists in the river at any given moment is never the same as the water that existed moments before. The river's essence is not in the individual droplets, but in the continuous movement, the flow that carries the water from one place to another. Our lives, too, are like this river. We are not defined by a fixed identity, but by the ever-changing flow of our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, constantly shifting, constantly changing, and yet always interconnected. In the same way that a wave rises and falls in the vast ocean, we, too, rise and fall in the current of life. Each moment we experience is like a wave, fleeting and impermanent. Yet, as part of the ocean, it is connected to something larger, something beyond the individual wave. We are like that wave, ever-changing, always moving, yet part of a vast, interconnected whole that binds us together. Our thoughts and actions, too, are waves in this endless ocean of experience. They arise, they dissolve, and they leave their mark on the surface of the ocean, ripples that extend far beyond the moment we experience them. When we believe in the notion of a permanent, unchanging soul, we are like a wave trying to grasp onto its own form, attempting to hold onto an identity that is inherently fluid and impermanent. We cling to the illusion that we are static, unchanging entities, individuals with a fixed nature that will persist forever. But this illusion causes suffering, for it ties us to attachments and fears that are not rooted in reality. The fear of death, the fear of change, the fear of losing who we are, they all arise because we are clinging to something that is never truly fixed. The wave cannot remain the same, just as the river cannot hold onto a single drop of water. This clinging creates the illusion of permanence, and with it, the suffering that arises when we realize, too late, that we cannot stop the current from flowing. The Buddha's teaching of anatta helps us to see beyond this illusion. By recognizing that our sense of self is not a permanent entity, but rather a process, we can begin to understand the nature of existence itself. Our minds are not fixed, and neither are our bodies. Each thought, each emotion, each perception is part of the larger current of life, and like the waves in the ocean, they arise and pass away. In this recognition, we find freedom. Freedom from the anxiety of clinging to an unchanging self. Freedom from the need to protect or preserve something that was never truly ours to begin with. When we release the belief in a permanent soul, we open ourselves to the fluidity of life, to the beauty of impermanence. We begin to see that our lives are not defined by any singular moment or identity, but by the vast continuum of experiences that flow from one to the next. Consider the way in which your life has unfolded so far. The person you were at 20 is not the person you are at 50, and the person you will be at 70 will not be the person you are today. But this is not a loss. It is a natural, beautiful unfolding. Just as the river's water is not lost when it moves downstream, so too are we not lost in the flow of life. Each experience shapes us, molds us, and brings us closer to understanding the deeper nature of our existence. Through the lens of anatta, we are invited to embrace the truth of our fluid, ever-changing nature. And in doing so, we are freed from the fear of losing ourselves, because we realize that there is nothing permanent to lose. We are the river, the wave, the ever-changing dance of life. And in this understanding, we find peace, and with peace, we find the possibility of true liberation. When we stop clinging to the illusion of a permanent soul, we allow ourselves to be fully present in the ever-changing flow of life. We release the need for control, for certainty, and for the belief that there is a fixed self to protect. Instead, we embrace the process, the beautiful, impermanent process that unfolds with each breath, with each moment. In this liberation, we discover that there is no I to protect, no soul to guard, and no fixed essence to defend. There is only the flow, the ever-present stream of consciousness that carries us forward, beyond the limitations of time, beyond the fear of death, and into the boundless freedom of simply being. We are waves in the ocean, momentary yet eternal, part of something much greater than ourselves. And in this understanding, we find the peace that surpasses all understanding. The web of interconnectedness. In the vast, intricate dance of life, the Buddha offers us a profound teaching that reveals the underlying nature of our existence. It is a teaching that invites us to see beyond the surface of things, to look deeper into the invisible threads that bind us all together. This teaching, known as P a letter 1E60, ICC a S a M U P P a macron D, or dependent origination, illuminates the truth that everything in the universe is interconnected. Nothing exists in isolation. Every action, every thought, every intention ripples through the fabric of existence, creating waves that reach far beyond what we can immediately see or understand. Imagine for a moment a spider's web, delicate, intricate, and seemingly fragile, yet incredibly strong. Each thread of the web is connected to every other thread, and a movement at any point in the web sends ripples through the entire structure. If a single thread is disturbed, the whole web feels the effect. So too, in our lives, every action we take, every word we speak, and every thought we entertain sends ripples through the vast web of our existence, touching the lives of others in ways we cannot always anticipate. The Buddha's teaching of dependent origination reveals how the phenomena we experience in our lives are not random or isolated, but are the result of a complex interplay of causes and conditions. Everything arises due to something else. There is no independent, self-sustaining existence. Every moment, every experience is dependent on the countless conditions that have come together to make it possible. Consider the simple act of speaking a kind word to a stranger. It may seem like a small gesture, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But in reality, that kind word could set off a chain of events that extends far beyond your immediate interaction. Perhaps it brightens the stranger's day. Perhaps it helps them feel seen or heard in a moment of need. And in turn, they might carry that newfound kindness into their next encounter. Maybe that kindness spreads to others in ways you will never know. The web of interconnectedness is vast, and a single action can reverberate through it, influencing countless lives in ways that remain hidden to us. Our lives are constantly shaped by this web of connections, by the unseen influences that ripple outward from the actions, thoughts, and intentions of others. We are not solitary beings navigating the world on our own. We are part of a vast, interconnected network where every thought and every action creates a link in the chain that binds us all together. And just as a thread in the spider's web cannot move independently of the other threads, we too cannot exist apart from the network of relationships and conditions that shape our lives. This understanding of interdependence challenges the illusion of self-sufficiency and independence. In a world that often emphasizes individualism and autonomy, the Buddha's teachings remind us that our lives are not self-contained. We are not isolated islands, separate from the world around us. Instead, we are interconnected, bound together by the actions and conditions of countless lives, past and present. Through the lens of P, a letter 1E60, ICC, a S, a MUPP, a macron D, we come to see that every action, no matter how small, has far-reaching consequences. The impact of our words, our actions, and even our thoughts extends far beyond our own immediate sphere of influence. In the same way that a pebble dropped into a pond creates ripples that spread out in all directions, our actions send waves through the fabric of the universe, influencing the course of events in ways we may never fully understand. Take, for instance, the power of intention. Every action, even the smallest, is born from an intention, a mental seed that takes root in our minds. These seeds, when nurtured, grow into actions, and actions shape our reality. Our intentions are like the threads of the web, woven into the fabric of our lives. If we plant seeds of kindness, compassion, and understanding, those seeds will grow into actions that foster peace and harmony. If we plant seeds of anger, resentment, or fear, those seeds will grow into actions that perpetuate suffering and discord. This is the essence of karma. Karma is not a system of reward and punishment, but a natural law of cause and effect. Every intention, every action leaves an imprint on the fabric of our consciousness. It shapes our future experiences, creating patterns that unfold over time. The actions of today are the seeds of tomorrow. By understanding the interconnectedness of all things, we begin to see the profound impact of our actions on the world around us. We become more aware of the ways in which our words and deeds ripple through the lives of others, and in this awareness, we find the power to choose more wisely. But the Buddha's teaching also invites us to see beyond the surface of our daily interactions. It calls us to recognize that the conditions shaping our lives are not always visible. The people we encounter, the events we experience, the opportunities that arise, they are not random. They are the result of a vast web of interconnected causes, shaped by the actions of others, by the conditions of our past, and by the choices we have made. In this way, our lives are both shaped by external conditions and shaped by the choices we make within the web. This understanding of interconnectedness also invites us to cultivate empathy and compassion. When we recognize that every person we encounter is part of the same web, that their actions and choices are shaped by their own experiences and intentions, we begin to see them with new eyes. We begin to understand that their pain, their joy, their struggles, they are not isolated, but part of the larger fabric of life. And in that understanding, we find the compassion to respond with kindness and empathy, knowing that their experiences are woven into our own. In the grand scheme of things, we may feel small, like one thread in a vast, infinite web. But the Buddha teaches us that even the smallest of threads has the power to shape the entire web. Our lives matter. Our actions matter. The way we live, the way we think, the way we speak, it all matters. Each moment is an opportunity to create ripples of compassion, wisdom, and understanding that will spread throughout the world, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. In this way, the web of interconnectedness becomes both a challenge and an opportunity. It challenges us to recognize our responsibility in the larger fabric of existence. It challenges us to be mindful of the ripples we send out into the world. But it also offers us an opportunity to shape the world in ways that promote peace, harmony, and understanding. By recognizing our interconnectedness, we can choose to live with greater intention, with greater compassion, and with a deeper sense of purpose. The web is vast, and we are all connected within it. Our actions, no matter how small, have the power to shape the world around us. The Buddha's teachings invite us to see this truth, to recognize the interdependence of all things, and in doing so, to live more mindfully, more compassionately, and more fully in the interconnected web of existence. Karma and its influence. At the heart of the Buddha's teachings is the profound law of karma, a natural, unchanging law that governs the intricate web of existence. Often misunderstood as a system of reward and punishment, karma is not a moral scoreboard. Instead, it is the fundamental law of cause and effect, a dynamic process that shapes not only the world around us but the very nature of our consciousness. Every action we take, every word we speak, and every thought we entertain creates an imprint on our mind. These imprints, like seeds planted in the soil of our consciousness, sprout into our future experiences. We may not see the seeds as they are planted, but they grow and bear fruit in ways we often cannot predict. The concept of karma in Buddhism is both simple and profound. Everything we do, think, or say has consequences, not in the sense of a judgment passed upon us by an external force, but as a natural result of the energies we put into the world. Just as the movement of a single wave creates ripples that extend outward in every direction, each thought and action reverberates through the fabric of our being, shaping the world in subtle and powerful ways. Consider the person who spends their days criticizing others, focusing on the flaws and faults they see in those around them. Initially, this may seem like nothing more than a passing habit, an unconscious part of their personality. But over time, these criticisms accumulate, both in their speech and their thoughts. Every word spoken in anger, every thought of judgment, hardens the mind, creating a mental environment ripe for negativity, resentment, and suffering. This person becomes trapped in a cycle of thoughts that reinforce themselves, a cycle of bitterness that breeds more bitterness. The energy they send out into the world is one of discord, and as a result, they find that their experiences are filled with conflict, discontent, and pain. This is the nature of karma. It is not a force that punishes us, but a natural law that simply reflects the energy we put into the world. The more we dwell in negativity, the more we cultivate a mind that is rigid, closed off, and unyielding. In this state, our suffering becomes self-perpetuating. Our actions are the seeds of our future experiences, and if those seeds are sown in a garden of bitterness, they will only yield more bitterness. However, the Buddha's teachings are not focused on condemning us to an endless cycle of suffering. Rather, they offer a profound path to transformation through awareness and conscious choice. If we recognize the power of karma, we are empowered to change the very nature of our experience. Just as the person who has lived in criticism can begin to cultivate the seeds of kindness and patience, so too can they change the very flow of their consciousness. Imagine this person, who has spent years criticizing, suddenly choosing to act with compassion. They begin to notice the small, everyday opportunities to speak kindly, to offer a listening ear, to practice patience in their interactions. Slowly but surely, their thoughts begin to shift. Their mind, once rigid with criticism, softens. It becomes more open, more flexible, more receptive to the beauty and kindness around them. This shift in attitude transforms not only their interactions with others, but their entire experience of life. The world, once seen through the lens of negativity, begins to be experienced through the lens of compassion and understanding. The power of karma lies in the ability of our actions to shape our future. But this shaping is not always as dramatic as we might think. It is not about grand, sweeping gestures, but about the small, everyday choices we make. Each time we choose kindness over criticism, patience over frustration, understanding over judgment, we plant a seed that grows into a more peaceful and fulfilling life. The flow of our consciousness shifts, not in one moment, but over time, as we consistently cultivate positive, life-affirming habits of thought, speech, and action. In Buddhism, karma is not a fate we must endure, but a tool we can use to shape our lives. It is the law of cause and effect, but it is also the law of choice. The Buddha teaches us that we are not bound by our past actions, but that we have the power to shape our future through our present choices. It is this understanding that brings great freedom and responsibility. We are not helpless in the face of our circumstances. We are active participants in the creation of our own lives. When we recognize the power of karma, we begin to understand that every moment is an opportunity to create something new. Every word we speak, every action we take, is a potential seed that will grow into a future experience. And while we may not always see the immediate consequences of our actions, over time, we will see the fruits of the seeds we have sown. If we plant seeds of kindness, those seeds will grow into a life filled with peace and connection. If we plant seeds of anger and judgment, we will harvest a life filled with conflict and suffering. This is the beauty of karma. It is not an external judgment, but a natural law that reflects the nature of our inner world. It is not a force that punishes us or rewards us, but one that simply returns to us the energy we put into the world. The Buddha's teachings offer us a path to harness this law, to use it as a tool for transformation. By becoming more mindful of our thoughts, words, and actions, we can begin to shift the flow of our consciousness, creating a life that reflects the wisdom, compassion, and peace we seek. In the end, karma is not about destiny or fate, but about freedom and responsibility. It is the recognition that we are the creators of our own experience, that the power to shape our lives lies in our hands. With this understanding, we are invited to live with greater awareness, to make choices that are aligned with our highest values, and to create a world filled with love, understanding, and compassion. Through our actions, we not only shape our own lives but contribute to the collective web of existence, leaving behind a legacy of kindness, peace, and wisdom. The process of rebirth. In the teachings of the Buddha, the concept of rebirth is far from the simplistic notion of a soul moving from one body to the next, as is commonly understood in many religious traditions. Instead, it is a subtle, dynamic process, the continuation of consciousness, shaped by the karmic energy we accumulate through our actions, thoughts, and intentions. To grasp this profound teaching, imagine the flame of a candle. When you light one candle from another, the flame that appears in the second candle is not the same as the one in the first. Yet, there is an undeniable continuity between them. The first flame is transferred, not in its exact form, but in its essence. Similarly, in Buddhism, the flow of consciousness moves from one life to another, but it is not a permanent, unchanging soul that transitions. It is the cumulative energy of our experiences, shaped by the actions we take and the intentions we hold. Rebirth, in this context, is not about a fixed self that is reborn. It is not a soul that is reborn in the same sense as reincarnation suggests, where the exact same identity reappears in a new body. Rather, it is the continuity of experience, the stream of consciousness, that continues. In the same way that a river's waters are never the same from one moment to the next, but the river itself continues, so too does our consciousness continue, ever shifting, but tied to the flow of past experiences and actions. This flow of consciousness is intricately tied to the law of karma. The actions, words, and thoughts we cultivate create imprints, or karmic seeds in the mind stream. These seeds may take time to ripen, but over the course of lifetimes, they influence our future experiences. A person who leads a life rooted in kindness, patience, and mindfulness will find their consciousness shaped by these qualities, leading to a life of peace, contentment, and wisdom. Conversely, someone whose actions are driven by hatred, greed, or ignorance will cultivate tendencies that lead them down a path of suffering, creating a mind that is rigid, self-centered, and disconnected from the true nature of reality. The Buddha taught that this flow of consciousness is not bound by any permanent, unchanging entity. What moves from one life to the next is not a fixed self, but rather a continuity of experience, shaped by the causes and conditions we have created in previous lives. This is why the Buddha spoke of anatta, or the doctrine of no self. The self that we believe in, the permanent, unchanging I, is an illusion, a collection of ever-changing mental and physical processes. There is no enduring essence that moves from one body to another. Rather, it is the stream of consciousness that flows, influenced by the karma we have cultivated. The analogy of the flame illustrates this beautifully. While the flame of the first candle is not the same as the flame of the second, there is a continuity that links them. The second flame is not entirely different, yet it is also not the same. So too with our consciousness. Each life, each moment, is linked to the one before it, but it is also shaped by the actions we take, the intentions we hold, and the karmic energy we accumulate. The flow of consciousness may appear to have a sense of continuity, but it is constantly changing, shaped by the imprints of the past. In this understanding, rebirth is not an abstract concept that happens only after death, but a continuous process that unfolds in every moment. Every action, every word, and every thought contributes to the unfolding of the next moment of experience. The choices we make today shape the conditions of tomorrow. The Buddha's teachings point us toward this recognition of impermanence and interconnectedness, encouraging us to be mindful of our actions and their far-reaching effects. Our present moment is not separate from the past, nor is it disconnected from the future. It is all part of an ongoing process of becoming, a continual unfolding of the consciousness that we create. This process of rebirth, driven by the forces of karma, also explains why we are not defined by the circumstances of our birth. We may be born into a particular family, a certain culture, or under specific conditions, but these are not permanent markers of who we are. They are simply the conditions that have arisen due to the karmic energy of our past actions. What truly defines us is how we respond to these conditions, how we cultivate our minds, and how we shape our future through our actions in the present. This brings an essential insight into the nature of suffering and liberation. Just as our past actions have shaped who we are today, so too can our present actions shape our future. If we continue to act out of ignorance, attachment, and delusion, our consciousness will remain trapped in cycles of suffering, endlessly reborn in conditions that perpetuate our confusion. But if we cultivate wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, we can change the course of our consciousness, leading to greater peace, understanding, and liberation. The process of rebirth, then, is not a fatalistic journey, but an invitation to transformation. We are not passive recipients of the world's circumstances, but active participants in the creation of our own experience. Each moment is an opportunity to shape the flow of our consciousness, to change the seeds we plant, and to cultivate a future that is rooted in wisdom, compassion, and understanding. Through mindfulness and awareness, we can begin to recognize the patterns of our past actions and choose to act with greater intention and kindness. In the Buddha's teachings, rebirth is not a mere metaphysical concept to be speculated upon. It is a practical reality that we can understand and influence in our daily lives. The process of rebirth is happening right now, in this moment. It is unfolding in every thought, every breath, every interaction. By recognizing this, we gain the power to change the trajectory of our lives, to heal old wounds, and to create new patterns of experience that lead us to freedom. Through the practice of mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living, we can align our actions with the higher qualities of wisdom, compassion, and peace, transforming the very flow of our consciousness and breaking free from the cycle of suffering. Ultimately, the process of rebirth is not about clinging to a fixed self or identity, but about understanding the flow of experience, the interconnectedness of all things, and the possibility for transformation. It is about recognizing that our actions matter, that our choices shape the future, and that we have the power to create a life that reflects the deepest truths of the Buddha's teachings. In this way, we are not bound by our past, but are free to create a new path, a path that leads us toward wisdom, compassion, and liberation from suffering. Understanding death and rebirth. In the cycle of life, death is often perceived as an end. But in the Buddha's teachings, death is merely a transition, a chapter closing and another beginning. It is not the end of the self, nor the transfer of an eternal soul from one body to another, as some traditions might suggest. Instead, it is the natural continuation of a process, an unfolding that is guided by the conditions and causes we have cultivated throughout our lives. The physical body, as we know it, inevitably perishes. But the consciousness, shaped by the karmic seeds we have planted, nurtured, and allowed to grow, moves on. This movement of consciousness is not a soul migrating to another body, but a continuation of experiences. The Buddha likened it to the flame of one candle passing to another. While the flame itself is not the same, it is the essence of the flame that moves on. Similarly, what passes from one life to the next is not a fixed self, but a continuity of consciousness, conditioned by our past actions. Each moment of our lives creates the conditions for the next, and this does not stop at death. Rather, the energy and imprints of our actions, thoughts, and intentions persist, influencing the next cycle of existence. At the moment of death, the Cuti-Sitta, the last moment of consciousness in this life, arises. This moment marks the cessation of one chapter, the closing of the door to the current life. The Cuti-Sitta is not a dramatic event, nor is it an isolated moment. It is simply the final ripple in a long series of ripples created by countless moments before it. It is the culmination of the experiences we have lived, the actions we have taken, the thoughts we have entertained, and the karma we have generated. The transition to the next life is marked by the Padasandha Siddha, the linking consciousness. This is the start of the new life, the moment when the continuity of consciousness finds its new form, its new conditions. The Padasandha Siddha does not appear randomly. It is not as if, upon death, the consciousness simply finds a new body at random. Rather, it is the natural result of the actions and conditions from the previous life. It is the continuation of our intentions and karma, shaped by the seeds we have sown in the fertile ground of our mind. This moment of transition is driven entirely by the causes and conditions of our past actions, our karma. Just as a tree is the result of the seed it once was, the next life is the result of the seeds we have planted in the mind. These seeds take root in the soil of our consciousness and grow according to the energy we have cultivated. If we have cultivated a life of kindness, compassion, and wisdom, the seeds of these qualities will bear fruit in the next life, guiding the consciousness to a realm where these qualities continue to flourish. Conversely, if we have cultivated negativity, hatred, or greed, those seeds will lead to a life shaped by these tendencies, continuing the cycle of suffering. The Buddha taught that life is a process of becoming, not a static state of being. The continuity of consciousness is not the preservation of a permanent self, but the unfolding of experiences and energy shaped by our actions. This is the essence of karma, the law of cause and effect that governs the unfolding of all existence. The seeds of karma do not disappear at death. They simply wait, dormant, for the right conditions to arise. The Padasandasiddha then provides the conditions for these seeds to sprout and lead to a new life, based on the karmic energy accumulated in the previous life. One key aspect of this understanding is that we are not bound to a fixed fate. We are not merely the product of past karma, but active participants in the creation of our future. Each moment of our lives is an opportunity to plant new seeds, to shape the course of our future. If we live with awareness, compassion, and wisdom, we can cultivate a mind that is conducive to happiness, peace, and liberation, not only in this life but in the lives to come. However, the process of death and rebirth is not just about the consequences of our actions. It is also about understanding the impermanence of all things. Death is not something to be feared, but rather a natural part of the cycle of existence. It is the moment when the physical body returns to the earth, but the consciousness moves forward, carrying with it the fruits of the past. This understanding helps us to approach life with a sense of urgency, not to fear death, but to live fully with mindfulness and intention, knowing that the choices we make today will shape our experience in the future. In Buddhism, there is no permanent self to be reborn. There is only the flow of consciousness, continually shaped by the conditions of our past actions. This continuous process of becoming offers us a profound sense of freedom. If we understand this flow, we can begin to live in harmony with it, creating the conditions for peace, happiness, and enlightenment, not only for ourselves but for all beings. Understanding death and rebirth through this lens invites us to live with greater mindfulness and compassion, knowing that every action, every thought, every moment of our lives is shaping the next. This awareness is not to create fear, but to awaken us to the preciousness of each moment, the impermanence of all things, and the boundless potential for transformation that lies within each of us. By understanding death and rebirth, we are reminded that nothing is permanent, and yet everything is interconnected. Our consciousness is like a river, ever-changing, flowing from one moment to the next. And though the water is never the same, the river continues to move forward, shaped by the causes and conditions of the past. In this flow, we are invited to live with wisdom, to cultivate good actions, and to transform our consciousness in such a way that, when the moment of death arrives, we move into the next life with peace, clarity, and the understanding that we are the creators of our own destiny. The realms of rebirth. In the teachings of the Buddha, the realms of rebirth are not physical places that we travel to after death, but states of being that arise from the actions, thoughts, and tendencies we carry with us throughout our lives. These realms are deeply intertwined with the choices we make and the karma we accumulate. Unlike the rigid, fixed understanding of heaven and hell in some spiritual traditions, Buddhist realms are fluid and dynamic, shaped by the intentions and actions that form the very fabric of our consciousness. In Buddhism, the realms of rebirth are not external physical locations, but internal states of mind, realms of experience conditioned by our karma. These realms are not separated by distance, but by the quality of our actions, thoughts, and emotional tendencies. They reflect the nature of our consciousness at any given time and determine the conditions of our future rebirths. The Buddha explained that beings are born into different realms based on the karma accumulated in their previous lives. These realms are both the consequences of the past and the opportunities for future transformation. There are lower realms, often referred to as the hell realms, where beings experience intense suffering. These realms are not to be understood as eternal places of punishment, but as states of mind that reflect the suffering caused by ignorance, hatred, and greed. The beings in these realms are often trapped in cycles of pain, violence, and despair, driven by negative emotions and unwholesome actions. The hell realms are not external locations where a soul is condemned to reside forever, but states of mind that emerge as a result of harmful actions in the past. They represent the consequences of living a life dominated by negative karma, acts driven by anger, resentment, and desire. While these realms may seem to be the ultimate form of suffering, they also serve as powerful reminders that the nature of our actions has a profound impact on the quality of our experiences. Similarly, the animal realm represents another state of existence in which beings are driven by instinct, without the higher awareness and wisdom that humans have the potential to cultivate. In the animal realm, creatures live primarily by following their instincts for survival, and their lives are marked by the struggles of seeking food, safety, and reproduction. These realms reflect the aspects of ourselves that are still dominated by our baser impulses, where we are driven by unexamined desires and the need for immediate gratification. Living in the animal realm is not a literal rebirth in a physical animal body, but a metaphor for the times in our lives when we are caught in cycles of unreflective, instinctual behavior. It represents the suffering that comes from acting without awareness or mindfulness. But not all realms are filled with suffering. There are also realms of temporary pleasure and happiness, often referred to as the heavenly realms. These realms are inhabited by beings who have accumulated positive karma through virtuous actions in their past lives. The heavenly realms are characterized by sensory pleasures, enjoyment, and contentment. These beings experience temporary happiness and satisfaction, but this pleasure is ultimately impermanent. The heavenly realms remind us that while pleasure and happiness may seem desirable, they are not lasting, and the ultimate goal is not to seek pleasure, but to transcend all attachment to the impermanent nature of existence. The heavenly realms, like the other realms of rebirth, are not eternal. They are temporary states of being shaped by the positive karma accumulated through virtuous actions. A person who cultivates generosity, kindness, and wisdom may experience rebirth in these realms, but the pleasures of these realms are not the final goal in Buddhism. While the heavenly realms offer temporary respite from suffering, they still fall within the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The Buddha taught that even the highest realms are not ultimate liberation, for they too are subject to change, decay, and eventual suffering. The key point here is that the realms of rebirth are not static or fixed. They are reflective of the quality of our consciousness. They represent the internal landscapes shaped by the karma we accumulate in each moment. These realms are not far-off destinations, but states of being that exist within us. They are like mirrors reflecting the energy we put into the world and the tendencies that arise in our minds. Whether we find ourselves in the hell realms, the animal realm, or the heavenly realms, They are all conditioned by our actions, desires, and attachments. In this understanding, our present actions hold the key to shaping our future. The Buddha emphasized the importance of living ethically, cultivating wisdom, and practicing mindfulness. Through our actions, we are creating the conditions for our future experiences, not just in this life, but in the next. Every thought, word, and deed creates an imprint in the mind stream, shaping the energy that will manifest in the future. The more we act with awareness, kindness, and compassion, the more we create a fertile ground for positive rebirths in the future. Mindfulness then becomes an essential practice. By being mindful of our actions, we are able to see the seeds we are planting with every choice we make. The more we live in alignment with the ethical teachings of Buddhism, practicing generosity, compassion, and wisdom, the more we create the conditions for positive realms of experience. Through mindfulness, we can begin to transform the tendencies of the mind, removing the roots of greed, hatred, and ignorance, and replacing them with the seeds of peace, wisdom, and compassion. This is why the Buddha's teachings on the realms of rebirth are so profound. They show us that our actions have consequences, not just for this life, but for the countless lives to come. By understanding the interconnectedness of all beings and the power of our choices, we are empowered to live in a way that cultivates peace, compassion, and wisdom. In doing so, we not only improve our present lives, but create the conditions for a future where we and others can experience freedom from suffering, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, and the realization of ultimate enlightenment. The realms of rebirth are not distant, foreign places. They are reflections of our inner world, shaped by our actions and our consciousness. Through mindfulness, ethical living, and the cultivation of wisdom, we can transcend the limitations of the lower realms, embrace the beauty of the heavenly realms, and move toward the ultimate liberation that lies beyond birth and death, the state of nirvana. Practical application for our lives. The teachings on rebirth are not abstract theories reserved for philosophical discussions or mystical contemplation. They are practical, deeply relevant tools designed to help us live more fully and meaningfully in the present moment. In Buddhism, the understanding of rebirth goes far beyond speculation about what happens after death. It illuminates the path to a more mindful, intentional way of living right now. By recognizing that our actions, thoughts, and intentions shape the flow of our consciousness, we can begin to transform our present and future. Through the cultivation of mindfulness, we can gain profound insight into the ways our mental states influence our experiences. And by doing so, we can consciously choose to break free from the cycles of suffering that often dominate our lives. Mindfulness is the cornerstone of Buddhist practice, and it is through mindfulness that we begin to observe the flow of our consciousness. Our minds are often chaotic, clouded with distractions, fears, and desires. By bringing awareness to each moment, we can begin to see the patterns that shape our thoughts and actions. We start to recognize that our thoughts and feelings are not fixed or permanent. They arise and pass away, like waves on the surface of an ocean. This awareness frees us from the illusion that we are controlled by our emotions or our past. Instead, we see that we have the power to choose how we respond to each moment. One of the most transformative aspects of mindfulness is its ability to illuminate the underlying causes of our suffering. The Buddha's teachings on rebirth remind us that the conditions we create in this life, through our words, actions, and thoughts, plant seeds for the future. If we allow ourselves to act out of greed, hatred, or ignorance, we create karmic imprints that will shape our experiences, leading to further suffering. However, If we practice kindness, patience, and compassion, we plant seeds that will blossom into positive experiences and greater peace. This recognition of our capacity to shape our destiny through the choices we make gives us the agency to change the course of our lives. Consider how often we act out of habit without reflection. We may find ourselves reacting in anger when someone cuts us off in traffic, or we may hold grudges against others who have wronged us in the past. In these moments, we are creating karma, imprints on our consciousness that will influence our future experiences. But through mindfulness, we begin to notice these automatic reactions, and instead of acting out of habit, we choose to pause and respond with awareness. Maybe instead of reacting with anger, we respond with understanding, or instead of holding on to resentment, we practice letting go. In these small moments, we begin to break free from the cycles of suffering that arise from unconscious actions. By being mindful of the present moment, we start to see that our actions and thoughts are not just fleeting occurrences. They are powerful forces shaping the trajectory of our lives. Every time we act with awareness, every time we choose compassion over anger, we are creating a new future. This is the practical application of the teachings on rebirth. Rebirth, in this sense, is not something that happens only after death. It is happening every moment. We are constantly rebirthing ourselves through our choices. Every decision to act with kindness or wisdom is a rebirth of our consciousness, steering us toward a more peaceful and fulfilling future. The Buddha's teachings offer us a profound opportunity to transform our lives, starting right now. We don't have to wait for some distant future to begin creating positive karma. We can begin today with the very next thought, the next word, the next action. And as we cultivate positive qualities such as mindfulness, generosity, patience, and compassion, we create the conditions for our future experiences to reflect these qualities. Our future rebirths, both in this life and the next, are shaped by the seeds we plant today. In this way, rebirth is not something to fear or wonder about, but something to actively engage with and shape in every moment. Through mindfulness, we also learn to cultivate an awareness of the impermanence of life. When we see how fleeting our thoughts and emotions are, we can begin to loosen our attachment to them. This is one of the key aspects of breaking free from the cycle of suffering. By letting go of our attachment to the self and its desires, we begin to experience life more fully. We learn to embrace change, knowing that it is not something to be feared but a natural part of the process of growth and transformation. The impermanence of life is not a source of anxiety, but a reminder that everything is in constant flux, offering us the freedom to let go of what no longer serves us. This awareness of impermanence also helps us to confront our own mortality with greater peace. Instead of fearing death, we begin to see it as a natural part of the cycle of existence. The more we understand the impermanence of all things, the more we can live fully in the present moment. We no longer waste time holding on to grudges, fears, or regrets, because we know that they, too, are fleeting. We focus on cultivating the qualities that bring us peace, happiness, and connection with others. This awareness allows us to live with a deeper sense of purpose, knowing that each moment is precious and that the seeds we plant today will shape the experiences of tomorrow. The Buddha's teachings on rebirth offer us not only a roadmap for understanding the nature of existence, but also a guide for living more consciously and ethically in the present. When we embrace mindfulness, we see that we have the power to shape our future experiences through our thoughts, words, and actions. We no longer live passively, swept along by the currents of habit or unconscious reactions. Instead, we become active participants in the creation of our own lives. By living with awareness, compassion, and wisdom, we can break free from the cycles of suffering and create a future that reflects the highest potential of our being. Ultimately, the practice of mindfulness brings us closer to the realization that rebirth is not something that happens at the end of life, but is an ongoing process that unfolds in every moment. By choosing to live consciously, we cultivate a life that is filled with peace, compassion, and understanding, creating the conditions for our future to be shaped by the highest qualities of the human spirit. Through mindfulness, we transform not just our present, but our future, one moment, one action, and one choice at a time. The impermanence of life. At the core of Buddhist philosophy lies one of its most profound and transformative teachings, the impermanence of life. This concept, anicca, asserts that nothing in life is permanent. Everything, our bodies, our emotions, our relationships, and even our thoughts, is in a constant state of flux, shifting with every passing moment. Just as the seasons change, so too does everything within the universe. The leaves on the trees, the flow of rivers, the stars in the sky, and the very breath that fills our lungs. Nothing remains the same, not for one instant. Impermanence is not a concept that invites despair, but one that offers liberation. The beauty of impermanence is that it points us toward the reality that all things, both joyful and painful, are temporary. This understanding provides a powerful antidote to the clinging and attachment that often lead to suffering. When we recognize that nothing lasts forever, neither our joys nor our sorrows, we are able to approach life with a sense of freedom. We no longer need to hold onto anything desperately, as though it is the one thing that will bring us lasting happiness. Instead, we learn to appreciate the beauty of the present moment, knowing it is fleeting and precious. Just as a flower blooms with vibrant color and fragrance, only to wither and fade, so too do our lives unfold in a continuous cycle of change. The petals of youth, vitality, and health may fall away, just as the circumstances of our lives, our successes, failures, and relationships shift and transform over time. In this way, life is an ever-changing dance between birth, death, and rebirth, each moment passing into the next, each experience giving way to the next. The Buddha encourages us to see this truth clearly and to embrace it, for in doing so, we find the freedom to live fully without the fear of loss or change. Impermanence is often perceived as something to be feared. We fear the loss of loved ones, the passing of time, the inevitable decline of our own bodies. But the Buddha teaches us that it is not impermanence itself that causes suffering. It is our resistance to it, our attachment to things that are destined to change, that brings us pain. When we resist the natural flow of life, when we grasp at what is transient as though it were permanent, we set ourselves up for suffering. This is the root of so much of our anxiety and distress. We want things to stay the same, to freeze in place, to remain forever unchanged. But the more we cling, the more we suffer when change inevitably comes. By understanding impermanence, we begin to loosen our grip on the things and experiences that we fear losing. We recognize that change is not an enemy to be fought, but a natural, essential part of existence. Life is a fluid process, and just as a river cannot be stopped from flowing, neither can time or change be halted. In accepting this, we begin to live with greater peace. We no longer feel the need to control everything, to make everything permanent. Instead, we begin to flow with life, embracing each moment for what it is, without the need for it to last forever. The Buddha's teachings invite us to cultivate a deep awareness of impermanence in our daily lives. We can practice this awareness by reflecting on the fleeting nature of our own experiences. Take a moment to consider the relationships you hold dear, how they have changed over time. Perhaps friendships have come and gone, and loved ones have aged or passed on. If you reflect deeply, you will see that all relationships, no matter how close or enduring, are subject to the flow of time. This is not to say that we should not cherish and love those around us, but rather that we can love more fully and freely when we understand that our time with others is limited. This understanding allows us to appreciate the present moment, knowing that it will never come again in exactly the same way. This understanding also applies to our own bodies. As we age, we may notice the inevitable changes, the graying of hair, the wrinkles that deepen, the aches and pains that become more frequent. For many, this is a source of great fear and resistance. But when we see our bodies with the clarity of impermanence, we begin to understand that this too is a natural process. Our bodies, like everything else in the universe, are subject to change. And rather than being something to resist or fear, this becomes an invitation to live fully in the present, to honor our bodies as they are, and to appreciate each breath, each movement as something precious and fleeting. The key to embracing impermanence is mindfulness. Mindfulness allows us to be present with each moment, to experience life as it is, without the need to hold on to it. Through mindfulness, we begin to notice how often we attach ourselves to things, our plans, our possessions, our identities, and how, in doing so, we create a false sense of permanence. We attach to things because we want them to give us lasting happiness. But when we understand that all things are impermanent, we can release this attachment and find true freedom. We no longer need to seek happiness in external things, for we learn to find contentment in the simplicity of the present moment, in the unfolding of life as it is. When we embrace the truth of impermanence, we are freed from the anxiety that comes with trying to control or preserve the fleeting nature of life. We understand that everything, from the most joyful experiences to the most painful, is temporary. This realization allows us to live with less fear, less attachment, and greater clarity. Instead of clinging to the past or dreading the future, we are able to meet life as it comes, fully engaged in each moment, with the understanding that it is enough for what it is. In this way, impermanence becomes a source of wisdom and peace. By accepting the flow of change, we stop fighting against it and start flowing with it. Just as the river flows toward the ocean, we learn to accept the changing tides of life with grace. We let go of our need to hold on to things, and in doing so, we discover a deeper sense of freedom, one that allows us to experience the richness of life in all its impermanence, its beauty, and its fleeting nature. The teachings of rebirth in Buddhism offer a profound and liberating shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on the idea of an eternal soul, Buddhism invites us to recognize the fluid and interconnected nature of our consciousness. It is not a fixed, permanent self that moves from one life to the next, but rather a continuous flow of experiences, shaped by our actions, thoughts, and intentions. This understanding transcends the illusion of separateness and helps us see the truth of our interconnectedness with all beings. We are not isolated, but part of an ever-evolving web of existence, where every thought, word, and action creates ripples that touch the world around us. In recognizing this, we find freedom. Freedom from the anxiety of clinging to a self that is destined to change, freedom from the fear of death, and freedom from the attachments that bind us to the past. By letting go of the illusion of permanence, we are able to embrace life as it is, with all its joys and sorrows, its impermanence and beauty. We are free to live fully in the present moment, knowing that every action, every breath, is an opportunity to plant the seeds for a more peaceful, compassionate future. Living with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom allows us to create the conditions for well-being, both in this life and in the next. Mindfulness helps us to see clearly, to understand the nature of our thoughts and actions, and to choose wisely in every moment. Compassion opens our hearts to the suffering of others, helping us to act with kindness and generosity, while wisdom enables us to discern what is truly important and to let go of attachments that lead to suffering. By cultivating these qualities, we not only transform our own lives but contribute to the greater good, creating a world where peace, understanding, and compassion can flourish. Ultimately, the Buddhist path is not about seeking a better rebirth, nor about escaping from life's challenges. It is about transforming the present moment, understanding the nature of existence, and finding liberation from suffering. Rebirth is not something that awaits us at the end of our lives, but a process that unfolds in every moment. Every thought, every action, every intention creates the conditions for the life we will experience in the future. The path to liberation lies not in trying to escape the cycle of rebirth, but in awakening to the present moment, letting go of attachments, and cultivating the wisdom and compassion that lead to true peace. By embracing the teachings of Buddhism, we are given the tools to live with greater clarity, purpose, and joy. We come to understand that the nature of existence is impermanent, that we are not bound by a fixed self, and that through mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, we can transcend suffering. In doing so, we move closer to the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice: liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and the realization of nirvana, the cessation of suffering and the realization of true freedom.